Billionaire's son mocked a waitress. Then his father walked in and knelt to her. Have you ever met someone who seemed to have everything? Money, looks, confidence, but somehow missed the simple art of kindness? Ethan Caldwell was that kind of man. The kind who woke up in a world already bent to his will. The morning light spilled through the glass walls of his Manhattan penthouse, painting soft gold on the edge of his silk sheets. Below, the city was alive, tiny cars threading between towers, the hum of ambition rising like a song only he could hear. His phone buzzed again and again on the nightstand. Congrats on the promotion. Dinner tonight? You're on fire, man. Ethan smirked, glancing at his reflection in the mirror. Even half asleep, he looked like success. Sharp jawline, crisp hair, perfect posture. He didn't see the loneliness behind that reflection. He didn't need to. His world ran on validation, numbers, compliments, attention. He lived high above everyone else, literally and emotionally, where problems felt small and empathy was an optional luxury. He stretched, slid into his designer shirt, and checked the time. Tonight he'd be celebrating at the Monarch, the city's crown jewel of fine dining. It was his father's favorite restaurant, but Richard Caldwell was out of town, or so Ethan thought. The night would belong to him and his friends, a pack of wealthy 20-somethings who treated life like a playground they owned. Across town, the morning looked different. Lila Hayes stood in a one-bedroom apartment where the wallpaper had started to peel. The hum of an old fridge filled the silence. She tied her hair into a messy bun, slipped into her worn shoes, and checked on her mother, who lay resting on a couch covered with a thin blanket. A soft cough escaped the woman's lips. Back late, Lila whispered, placing a note beside a bottle of cough syrup. Don't worry. She glanced at a faded photograph by the window, her late father smiling in a nurse's uniform, his arm wrapped proudly around her mother. The picture had yellowed over the years, but the feeling behind it hadn't. Her father had taught her that dignity wasn't about what you wore or owned. It was how you carried yourself when no one else noticed. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her apron and walked out into the sharp morning air. The bus ride was long, filled with strangers lost in their own fatigue. Lila watched them quietly. Construction workers, cleaners, delivery drivers. People who built the world while others barely noticed. She knew their silence. She lived it. The Monarch was a world away from the one she came from. By nightfall, the restaurant glittered with chandeliers, and violin music floated through the air like silk. Waiters moved with quiet precision, their black uniforms spotless, their smiles practiced. Lila, in her crisp apron, carried trays between tables, careful and invisible. The regulars never looked at her face. To them, she was a pair of hands serving wine, a quiet voice asking if everything was all right. Tonight, though, something felt heavier, the kind of night where laughter came from a table that didn't belong to kindness. Ethan walked in with his friends, loud and polished, tossing car keys to the valet without looking back. Their cologne hit before their laughter did. They chose the corner table, the one with the best view of the city skyline, and waved off the menu with casual arrogance. Bring us the best bottle you've got, one of them said to Lila without making eye contact. Price doesn't matter, she nodded politely, her tone even. Of course, sir. Ethan watched her leave, eyes half amused. These people, he murmured to his friends, so serious all the time. You'd think smiling was extra work. His friends chuckled. He loved the sound. It meant they were still orbiting his charm, his privilege. When Lila returned with their wine, one of the men made a joke that didn't land well, gesturing grandly, his arm knocking the glass clean off the table. Red wine spilled like blood across the white linen, dripping to the floor. The music didn't stop, but the sound of the crash echoed sharp enough for nearby tables to turn. Oh, Lila gasped, already kneeling, reaching for the shards before they could cut anyone. I'm so sorry, sir, but Ethan cut her off with a smirk. Don't worry, sweetheart, he said, loud enough for the room to hear. You'll get the hang of it someday, if you last here. His friends burst out laughing. One clapped him on the back. Lila froze, cheeks burning. The sting of humiliation crawled up her throat, but she swallowed it down. Excuse me, she whispered, her voice trembling, and reached for a napkin. Her hands shook slightly as she cleaned the mess. The scent of wine mixed with the ache in her chest. Ethan leaned back, watching her like she was part of the entertainment. He didn't notice the silence spreading through nearby tables or the disapproving glances. To him, it was all harmless fun, a little joke. She finished cleaning, stood slowly, and turned away, her eyes glistening but steady. For a moment, Ethan's smirk faltered, just a flicker of discomfort. But his pride shoved it away. The waiter passed by, whispering, "You okay?" Lila nodded quickly, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. In that moment, she thought of her mother coughing at home, of the rent due next week, of the photo by the window. She had no room for anger, no space for shame. She just had to keep going. Ethan's laughter faded as he poured himself another drink, not realizing that the night had already shifted, that something unseen was making its way toward him, a force that would change everything he thought he knew about power, class, and respect. Because just then, the restaurant doors opened again. The music softened, as if the violinists themselves sensed something important. The waiters straightened. Conversations hushed. Richard Caldwell, Ethan's father, had entered the Monarch. Unlike his son, Richard carried his wealth quietly. His suit was expensive but understated. His presence alone commanded attention. The staff knew him instantly. Some guests even stood in respect. At Ethan's table, the laughter died mid-sentence. One of his friends whispered, "That's your dad?" Ethan straightened fast, his confidence cracking at the edges. "Didn't know he was back in town," he muttered. Richard's eyes scanned the room, calm but sharp. He nodded politely at the maitre d', who hurried forward, but Richard waved him off. He was looking for something, or someone. Then his gaze stopped on his son's table, the spilled wine, the kneeling waitress still cleaning the last few drops. Richard's expression changed, a quiet disappointment settling over his face. Without a word, he began walking toward them. The sound of his footsteps was enough to silence the room. Ethan tried to recover, forcing a grin. "Dad, what a surprise! Come join us!" But Richard didn't look at him. His eyes were on Lila. "What happened here?" he asked, his tone soft but heavy with authority. Ethan's smirk returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just a small accident, Dad. We're good." Richard didn't answer. Instead, he crouched down beside the waitress, gently picking up a shard of glass from the floor. The entire restaurant seemed to stop breathing. "Sir, please," Lila whispered, startled. "You don't need to." He looked at her kindly. "No one is above kindness." For a second, it felt like time held still. A billionaire on his knees beside a waitress. The image alone shook the air in the room. Guests stared. Waiters froze mid-step. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, but it wasn't pride. It was confusion. Shame, something he couldn't name. Lila blinked rapidly, not knowing whether to thank him or disappear. Richard stood, setting the shard aside. His gaze, calm but piercing, moved to his son. "You mocked this woman?" he asked quietly. Ethan's throat tightened. "It was a joke." Richard's face hardened. "Then you've forgotten where we came from." The silence around them grew deeper. Ethan's friends shifted uneasily, one pretending to check his phone, another staring at his drink. Richard looked around the room, his voice steady and low, the kind that carried without shouting. "This woman deserves your respect. She's earning her life, not wasting it." Ethan's jaw tightened, but the words landed harder than he wanted to admit. For the first time that night, he couldn't meet his father's eyes. Lila stood quietly, not sure what to say. Her cheeks flushed from a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. No one had ever stood up for her like that before. Not in this place, not in years. Richard turned back to her with a faint, thoughtful look. "What's your name, miss?" "Lila," she said softly. "Lila Hayes." Richard's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed slightly as if recognizing something long buried in memory. "Hayes?" he repeated almost to himself. "Lila Hayes." And then, just like that, something flickered in his gaze. A recognition that would unravel the night entirely. "Your mother? Was she a nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital?" Lila blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Yes, sir," she said carefully. "Years ago." For a moment, Richard said nothing. The soft music filled the silence, strings humming gently between them. Then he nodded slowly, a faint tremor in his voice. "She once saved my wife's life. I never forgot her face." A ripple of quiet shock passed through the restaurant. Even Ethan's friends, who had been trying to disappear into their chairs, lifted their heads. Ethan's stomach turned as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Lila stared, unsure whether to believe it. My mother saved your wife. Richard nodded again, his expression softening. Your mother was on duty the night my wife collapsed in that hospital. I didn't have insurance back then, and she... He stopped, swallowing hard. She refused to let her die. She stayed all night, even off her shift. The doctors said if not for her, I'd have lost everything. Lila felt her breath catch. Her mother never spoke of that night, only said once that kindness circles back, eventually. She never thought it would circle back like this. Richard's eyes glistened, faintly as he turned to Ethan. That woman's mother saved your mother's life when I couldn't afford to. She gave us time we didn't deserve. And you repay it with cruelty? The words fell like stones. Ethan's chest tightened, shame crawling up his neck. He looked down, his throat dry, unable to speak. Richard's voice grew firm, resonant, carrying to every table. I built my company on respect, on remembering where I came from. You may wear my name, Ethan, but you've forgotten its meaning. Ethan's friends were completely silent now. One quietly reached for his jacket, murmuring something about needing fresh air, and slipped away. Another avoided Ethan's eyes altogether. The staff watched from the edges, torn between awe and discomfort. No one had ever seen the billionaire raise his voice before. He didn't need to. His words alone had weight. Lila stood still, caught in the storm of their silence. She wanted to disappear, to stop being the reason a father and son clashed in front of strangers. Mr. Caldwell, please, she said softly. It's all right, really. Richard shook his head. No, it's not. Not when decency becomes a luxury. You shouldn't have to swallow humiliation just to keep your job. Lila's lips parted, but she couldn't find the words. Something inside her, the quiet pride she'd carried for years, warmed and hurt at the same time. Richard turned to his son again. You think privilege is your reward, Ethan. It's not. It's your test. And tonight you failed it. Ethan's face burned. Dad, I get it, okay? I made a mistake. You don't have to, but Richard cut him off gently. You will work here. Every day. Until you understand what respect means. The entire restaurant seemed to draw a breath. Ethan blinked, stunned. What? You heard me. Richard's voice was calm again, steady and final. You'll start tomorrow. You'll earn what you take for granted. Dad, this is ridiculous. I have a job at my company, Richard interrupted. The one I built from nothing. But until you learn the worth of service, you'll have no place there. The maitre d' looked frozen. The waiters exchanged glances. Lila could barely process what she was hearing. Sir, she began softly. That's really not necessary. But Richard only offered her a faint smile, the kind that came from gratitude too deep for words. It's long overdue. He reached into his jacket, placed a crisp envelope on the table, his payment for the evening, and turned toward the exit. Good night, everyone. As he walked away, the room stayed completely silent. Even after the door closed behind him, no one moved. Ethan sat there, jaw clenched, surrounded by half-finished glasses of wine and the echo of his father's words. The laughter from earlier now felt childish, sickly. Lila quietly began clearing the table. He didn't stop her. For the first time, he couldn't even look at her. The next morning, the Monarch looked different to Ethan. He arrived in a plain white shirt and black slacks, sleeves rolled up, no watch, no tailored jacket. The staff gave him polite but skeptical glances. The chef muttered under his breath, Billionaire's son, huh? Let's see how long that lasts. The manager handed him an apron. You start with table clearing, she said, and no special treatment. You're one of us now. He nodded stiffly, trying to hide how out of place he felt. The smell of frying oil filled the air. The clatter of dishes, the sizzle of pans, the rush of voices, it was a rhythm he'd never known. By noon, his shoulders ached. By evening, his feet throbbed. Every time he thought of complaining, he saw Lila pass by carrying 3 plates at once, calm and focused. She moved like someone who'd done this for years, graceful, patient, invisible, yet strong. When a customer spilled soup, he moved to help. The man waved him off sharply. I asked for the waiter, not the new guy. Ethan bit back his pride and wiped the table anyway. For the first time in his life, he understood how small people could make you feel when they thought they were bigger. That night, as the restaurant emptied, he sat alone on a stool near the kitchen door, staring at his blistered hands. The laughter of his friends from that night echoed faintly in his mind, but it felt like it belonged to someone else. Lila walked past, carrying a tray of glasses. "You okay?" she asked, pausing. He looked up, surprised by her tone. Not pitying, not mocking, just simple concern. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Guess I'm learning." She smiled faintly, setting the tray down. "It gets easier." He tilted his head. "Does it?" She shrugged. "You just stop expecting it to be easy." For a moment, they shared a quiet look. Two people from different worlds, finding a strange kind of understanding in exhaustion. The days turned into weeks. Ethan showed up early, stayed late. He carried trays, cleaned tables, learned to read people's moods, learned when to smile and when to listen. Lila saw the change before anyone else did. There was a night when a tray of glasses slipped from a new waiter's hands. The crash echoed loud and sharp. Everyone froze, waiting for the usual scolding. But Ethan was already kneeling, helping the boy pick up the pieces. "Happens to everyone," he said gently. "Just be careful next time." Lila watched from across the room. He didn't even notice her. There was no audience now, no image to protect. Just quiet decency. When their eyes finally met, Ethan gave a small, tired smile. "Guess I'm getting the hang of it." Lila smiled back. "Looks like it." In that moment, the restaurant didn't feel so divided. No billionaires, no waitresses. Just people trying to be better than they were yesterday. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the glass, and somewhere in that glow, Richard Caldwell was watching from his car, unseen, proud but silent, waiting for the lesson to settle completely before he stepped back into his son's world. A month later, the Monarch was busier than ever. The winter chill outside had driven the city's elite indoors, the restaurant filled with laughter, silverware, and candlelight. But for Ethan, the sound no longer felt distant or decorative. It was part of his rhythm now, the steady heartbeat of real work. He wiped down tables with quiet focus, nodding to the chef, helping the dishwasher with crates, and greeting guests with practiced calm. There were no more shortcuts, no more smirks. He'd learned that respect wasn't a performance, it was consistency, built one humble act at a time. Lila noticed it in the small things. The way he stepped aside to let others pass, the way he helped refill water without being asked, the way he apologized when he slipped up. She didn't say much, but she watched, the same way she'd watched her mother care for people who didn't always thank her. That night, while polishing glasses near the bar, she caught him glancing at the front door, almost nervously. She followed his gaze and froze. Richard Caldwell had returned. He entered quietly, no entourage, no attention-seeking gesture. Just presence, calm, steady, commanding. The maitre d' greeted him with a polite smile, and Richard nodded, scanning the room until his eyes found his son. Ethan straightened, instinctively tugging at his apron. The old reflex and the need to impress flickered, but then disappeared. He didn't try to hide who he was anymore. Not the sweat, not the humility. Richard walked toward him. Conversations hushed again, like that night weeks ago, though the air now held a different weight. Not tension, but anticipation. "Evening, sir," Ethan said quietly, unsure whether to smile or bow. Richard looked at him, really looked, at his posture, his steady breath, his hands that no longer trembled from entitlement but from effort. "You've been working here a while," Richard said. Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." Every day since that night, Richard's eyes softened. "And what have you learned?" Ethan hesitated. His voice, when it came, was steady but humble. "The people aren't below me. That I used to treat kindness like decoration. But it's the foundation. Without it, everything else collapses." Richard said nothing for a moment. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried pride without arrogance. "You've learned the only lesson worth learning." He glanced toward Lila, who stood a few feet away, frozen mid-step. "You helped him," Richard said to her. "Even when he didn't deserve it." Lila shook her head softly. "He helped himself, sir. I just didn't stand in his way." Richard's eyes warmed. "You sound like your mother." Lila's lips curved into a small, tender smile. "She used to say the same about others, that people are better when you stop expecting the worst." The chef peeked from the kitchen doorway, whispering to a busboy, "That's the owner's kid? Doesn't look it anymore." Richard caught it and smiled to himself. "Looks can lie," he murmured, then turned to his son again. "Ethan, take a walk with me." They stepped outside into the cool night. The city glowed beneath them. glass towers, endless traffic, the pulse of millions of lives crossing invisibly. For a moment, father and son stood without speaking. "I should have taught you sooner," Richard said quietly. "I gave you comfort but not gratitude." "That's on me," Ethan shook his head. "You gave me a second chance, Dad. That's enough." Richard looked at him, pride glinting behind restraint. "You've earned your place back at the company. But remember, every floor, every desk, every person you lead has a story. If you forget that, you'll lose more than power. You'll lose yourself." Ethan nodded slowly. "I won't forget." Weeks later, the Monarch hosted a private event, a quiet dinner honoring the restaurant's staff. Richard had arranged it without telling anyone, insisting it be simple. No reporters, no announcements, just gratitude. The long table glowed under soft chandeliers. Waiters who usually stood in corners now sat as guests, laughter echoing where orders used to fly. Lila sat near the end, shyly tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as Richard raised a glass. "To the people who make this place more than a restaurant," he said warmly. "To the ones who remind us that dignity isn't bought, it's lived." The staff clapped softly. Lila smiled, her chest full but quiet. Richard's gaze shifted to her. "And to the Hayes family," he continued, voice thick with gratitude, "for showing mine what humanity truly looks like." The room went still. Touched by the sincerity in his tone, Lila blinked back emotion. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. Richard nodded. "No, thank you." Ethan sat across from her, no longer the golden prince of the penthouse, but something better, human, grounded. He raised his glass to her across the table, a small, wordless gesture of respect. Later, when the dinner ended and most people had gone home, Lila stayed behind to help clean. Old habits were hard to break. Ethan stayed too, stacking plates beside her. "You don't have to," she told him. He smiled. "I know." They worked in silence for a while. The night outside was quiet, the hum of the city soft behind the tall windows. Finally, she looked at him. "Do you miss it?" "Miss what?" "The old life. The comfort. The version of you before all this." Ethan thought for a moment. "No," he said honestly. "That wasn't living, that was floating." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Then I guess you landed." He chuckled softly. "Hard. But you're standing," she said, stacking another plate. He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Yeah, thanks to you." Lila shook her head gently. "Thanks to your father." Ethan's eyes softened. He just opened the door. "You're the one who showed me how to walk through it." For a moment, their eyes held. Not romantic, not grand, but deeply human. Two people who'd carried pain in different shapes, meeting somewhere in the middle of it. The lights dimmed. The restaurant fell silent again. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft flakes brushing the glass like tiny miracles. Richard stood unseen at the far end of the room, watching them with quiet pride. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He saw what he'd hoped to see. A man changed, a heart mended, and a debt of kindness finally repaid in full. As he stepped out into the night, he whispered something only the city lights could hear. "Your mother would be proud too." And somewhere inside, Lila smiled without knowing why, as if she could feel gratitude moving through the air, circling back again, just like her mother always said it would.